Hello. This is a quick rundown of our radish assignment. This is going to be a semester-long endeavor that will end with your final lab report. So we're going to grow some radishes. The idea here being that starting now, you are going to create your own soil and grow radishes in it. And then as we go through the term, you are going to learn about soil and about the properties of soil, and you'll be able to assess your radish soils and see from a radish's point of view whether you created a good soil or a bad soil for that radish and why, and then write a report about it. Why radishes? It is a really, really easy to grow vegetable, and it grows fast. So in a couple of months, we have fully formed radishes. You don't have to plant them very deep, and you can see results pretty quickly. They're really tolerant of frost, which is great in Ontario because then you can start them right first thing. But for us, it's more important that they're not super heat or drought tolerant. So you need to pay attention to how much water you're feeding them and where you're keeping them in your house. But in the fall, we're more worried about them getting frozen than boiled. The most important thing I want you guys to realize before we start this is that this is your project. I'm not going to give you a lot of instructions on the minutiae of how you're going to run this project. Yes, I'm telling you have to grow radishes, and yes, I'm telling you have to analyze your soil and write a report. But beyond that, I want you guys to make your own decisions. I know that that is going to be stressful for some of you, but what I have found is once you get out there in the world, people aren't telling you what to do a lot of the time. You have to figure it out. So this is an exercise, a practice in doing things on your own. Setting up your own experiment with your own parameters, finding your own results. So you should do a little research, figure out what variables you want to change, what results you expect to see. How much care are you going to give to these radishes? Are you just going to plant them and leave them? Are you going to water them every day? Are you going to measure them every day? You need to figure out all those things. What do you want to change? What do you want to control? This is your experiment. So the first thing you're going to have to do is buy some radish seeds. There are several different varieties. It's fall, so get what you can find realistically. Usually I can find some at Canadian Tire. Here in North Bay, Burroughs always has a good seed selection. If you're in North Bay, I can probably supply you with some radishes. We can set up some kind of collection date. I usually like to get the radishes so that everyone has the same species so that we can compare our results among groups. But being as some of you are probably far away, we're not going to be able to compare because there's going to be so many variables that are different. So what's the point in getting the exact same variety? As long as you have a radish of some kind, I think it'll be okay. You're also going to need something to plant it in. I typically, at the university, have plastic cups that we plant them in and leave them in the greenhouse. We do replicates of 10. But I have found in my own gardening that disposable, like Tim Hortons cups and Twigs coffee cups, make remarkably good seed planting planters. So those are things to collect ahead of time. You're also going to have to figure out if you have any recording materials. Are you going to water your radishes? What are you going to use? Are you going to measure that amount of water? What are you going to use? Are you going to measure the height of the greens coming up? Are you going to use a ruler to do that? Are you going to measure the room temperature or the soil temperature? Do you have access to a thermometer to do that? Think about these sorts of things and try and find those things before we actually get around to planting the radishes. Once you've got a plan, you've found your radish seeds, I recommend germinating. So at the university, I put a layer of paper towel in a tray. I cover that tray with water and fully saturate that paper towel. Then I spread out seeds and put another layer of paper towel on top and make sure it's saturated. And then the seeds can sprout and stay moist, and they'll germinate. And then you can pick through the seeds and only choose the ones that have sprouted and are doing well. This sort of removes the chances that you plant 4 seeds and only 3 grow. You've already got the best seeds that are sprouting, because not every seed is going to sprout. Some are just going to be duds. It also gives you a little head start on the planting process. Once you've got your seeds and you set them aside to germinate, now it's time to go find your soil. What do you want to do? You might want to do a little bit of research first and figure out, do you want to make the best perfect radish soil that radishes have ever seen? Or do you want to purposely mess with the radishes and add an amendment that might be bad for them and see what happens? So if we were in the classroom, these are some of the soil amendments that I typically have available for you guys to use. I bring in compost. I usually just buy a couple bags of potting soil. Sand is very plentiful in North Bay. Clay is a little bit harder to find, but I do have a little bit that we sometimes add. Coffee grounds, super easy to get. Eggshells, again, also super easy. Sometimes it's nice to add like dried leaf litter. Just interesting carbon. We talk a little bit later about carbon and nitrogen levels and ratios. Sawdust is an interesting additive. It's just something that is easy for me to get because my father is a cabinet maker, and maybe not a good amendment, maybe it is. And peat moss is universally accepted in planting circles. It has a lot of different properties that I think you should research, like water holding capacity. And anything else, if you guys think of something that you specifically want to add composted banana peels, or you specifically want to add shredded paper, that's another easy thing to find, is shredded paper. There's so many different things you could add to this. So then we're going to take those amendments and make your soil. So some students in the past have layered those amendments in their pots. So each pot has a specific measurement of layered soil layers. Other students will measure out how much soils they're using. Usually like if there's 10 pots of soil, they'll measure 2 pots worth of this, 2 pots worth of that, 2 pots worth of that, and they know they have a fifth of each, which would be 20% of each type, or whatever measurements you want to use. There's different ways of doing this without needing a scale. Getting an idea, and then getting a big bowl or a basin and mixing all those soils together before putting them back into the pots that you're going to be using. While you're creating these soils, a lot of students have found in the past that they like to create 2 soils and compare how the radishes grow, where they only change one variable between those 2 soils. So add shredded paper to one soil and not to the other, add sawdust to one soil and not to the other, sort of situation. I also would request that you make a little extra of whatever you're making, because we might want to test those soils as we go along, and then you don't want to have to sacrifice one of your potted radish pots for testing that soil. And then once you have your soil mixed and in the pots, you can plant your radishes. I recommend that you use replications of 10 pots, then you have more data. Some students in the past have done 5 and 5 when they want to compare 2 different amendments. In each pot, you can put, I'm going to say, up to 4 seeds. You can put only 1 seed in each pot if you wish. If you have a lot of pots and want to do a lot of replicants, that's a great system. With our pots at the university, you can fit up to 4. Over 4, it doesn't really grow as well. 3 seems to be a sweet spot, but I wonder with these, if you're using like the standard size Tim Hortons cup, 3 or maybe 2 might be a better approximation of how many can grow in each pot, as long as you're consistent, whatever you want to choose. I also suggest before you add your seeds, depending on how dry the amendments were, you might want to add water to saturate that soil before you start your process, because you don't want to be, you want to have a good water base in that soil to start. You don't want to, radishes are intolerant to drought. And drying out seems to be one of the problems in getting a good red juicy radish. Your leaves might grow, but you won't get a good root mass. Whatever you do, keep good records. Be consistent, pay attention. What are you adding? Write it down. How much? What are you going to do your measurements? Make sure you do them the same time of day, the same day of the week. How are you mixing those soil amendments? Make sure you stay consistent and record everything you do. Are you taking daily measurements? Are you taking weekly measurements? What are you going to measure? Do you want to measure the height of all of your radishes as they grow? Do you want to measure the temperature of the room every day? Are you going to water them every day, and how much? A lot of times, I'm forgetting what the word is in the plant world. In the animal world, we call it ad libitum. As an animal gets hungry, we just feed them as much as they want to eat. So it's not like when I'm feeding my salamanders, I don't give them 3 fruit flies a day. I give them as many fruit flies as they are hungry for. So if they stop eating, I stop giving them fruit flies. And you can do the same thing with watering your plants. You can just keep the moisture level at a certain amount, that the soil looks dry, you add a little bit more water. But again, I would record how much you add and when. So the idea here is you guys are going to grow your radishes, and then near the end of semester, we are then going to harvest them. So we might do some soil tests on them as we go. And that's why I want you to have some extra soil so that we can measure texture and possibly pH of the soil before we harvest your radishes. And then after we harvest the radishes, you might want to measure pH again to the soil that the radishes have been living in. Has that level changed? If we were in the lab, we could measure the chemical changes. It's late August as I'm recording this, and I have no idea if we're going to be able to get into the lab and record any chemistry of our soils. If I can make some at-home chemistry experiment, I don't know, but I know that we can test pH. I know how to make a pH indicator at home. And there's a lot of other things we can do. But having some before soil and some after soil will be helpful for you. The idea here being gather as much information as you can so that at the end you can write a report about what you found, about why your radishes grew or why your radishes didn't grow. And we'll talk more about how to write a report and what I expect from that report in a later lecture closer to when it's due. Right now you're probably full of all sorts of things. It's early September, you haven't quite got there yet. We'll talk about it later. But one thing I do want to mention now is in the past, I have given out prizes for the single largest radish and the largest total biomass. So like you add all of the weights of your radishes up. We typically will give those prizes out in the last lecture of the year. In the past, they've been little trinkets. It's probably just going to be a little like lapel pin. I got a button maker borrowed from the university and made a bunch of radish buttons. It's just for fun. I don't want you to think that if you grow a small radish that your marks will be affected. In fact, I personally think that if your radishes don't grow, you might have an easier report to write because then you have tons of things to write about why your radishes didn't grow. If you grow perfect, beautiful, large radishes, then your report is like, yeah, I grew great radishes. Okay, why? What did you do right? And maybe that's easier to write for you. I personally think it's easier to figure out what I did wrong than what I did right sometimes. But anyway, that is our radish report. So check out on Blackboard, and I should have some more details about that, and there will be some more details as we go. But that should get us started.